Hi everybody. So I'm going to try this out and see how my recording goes for this this lecture on chapter 17, which is on economic policy making. And I hope this video helps you understand a little bit more about the economic policies that the U.S. government has and how it affects corporations and workers in the country. So there's our first photo, kind of the starting point for chapter 17. And I encourage you to grab your textbook and the notes that you've taken so far and to follow along. For the most part, I'm going to follow along in the textbook, and this is going to be pretty live, so it's not going to be scripted. I'm just going to go with it, and I hope that it works well for you. So chapter 17 is economic policy making, really focusing on the economy and especially the government's involvement in the economy, regulating the economy, protecting players in the economy. And we know that the one of the main reasons for the U.S. Constitution was because of economic problems that the nation was having under the Articles of Confederation, that states were basically hurting each other for their own benefit, and it was causing all sorts of economic problems throughout the entire country. And in 1786, that summer, there was the Annapolis Convention. And the Annapolis Convention was where they came up with some basic ideas about what needed to be changed in the Articles of Confederation that had to do with economic issues and regulations. From that, the Philadelphia Convention was convened in 1787, and a lot of the issues that they had to deal with had to do with economic issues. And so we're going to take a look at that a little bit and kind of harken back to the constitutional, foundation when it comes to economic stuff. The textbook does that a little bit, but I might refer to it a little bit more as we go through this whole process. But there's the overview of the chapter. Those are the sections we're going to take a look at, and I'm going to go through them as quickly as I can. It's not going to be maybe as long as yesterday's. It might be about the same, and we'll just see how it goes. First off, the chapter starts with this politics and action section, and a lot of that politics and action section had to do with the story of the Great Recession that happened starting in 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009. And in chapter 14, we saw that graph that showed the period of time, 2007 to 2009, where the country was in recession, and there was a lot of economic problems related to that. This is the story, and the reason for the Great Recession was because the credit market was in a lot of trouble, and it was kind of almost rotting from the inside. One of the terms that gets tossed around is derivatives. We're not talking about calculus derivatives. Derivatives were financial bundles, I guess was the best way to describe it. And what financial experts were doing in these sort of stock brokerages was bundling some bad or weak stock, something called junk bonds or junk stocks, that weren't worth very much and were really risky investments. And they were bundling them with some better, higher quality stocks. And it was really a complicated process. And not very many people knew how derivatives were created, even, economic experts and financial experts. And then these stock companies would sell these packages or bundles called derivatives. And on top of that, they would take out insurance policies. And the insurance policy was basically a bet that those derivatives would fail and default. And the stock brokers that were putting these packages together, these companies that were putting it together, they were going to win either way because they took out these insurance policies. But it weakened the financial sector and the lending sector in the economy so much that it caused a crisis. And the Treasury Secretary at the time, a guy named Henry Paulson, and this was during the end of the Bush administration. So in 2007, George Bush was coming up to the last of his 8 years, and John McCain and Barack Obama were running for election to be the next president. And in the middle of this election year, the economy just started to weaken. And Treasury Secretary Paulson proposed a big bailout package, $700 billion, which was the biggest single financial bill at the time, ever. And compared to what's been going on these last few days with the economic rescue package that was over $3 trillion, $700 billion seems like not that much. But the idea that Paulson had was that big banks and some other big corporations that had their own sort of credit departments had to be bailed out. Otherwise, the stock market was going to crash because of these derivatives. And there was a lot of support and opposition from both Republicans and Democrats in Congress. First, there was this idea that these, as Paulson said, these corporations, these big investment banks like Chase and Bank of America and Ford, Chrysler, big companies, Wells Fargo, these companies, if they failed, it would destroy the economy. So these bailouts were really, really important. And some of the supporters were moderates, like at the time Senator Obama and Senator McCain, who were slugging it out for the presidency. And there was some opposition as well, and the opposition came from the outer wings of the two parties. The liberal Democrats, like Sanders, opposed it because it was going to benefit rich people. It was going to benefit these big stock market investors. They were the ones that were going to benefit the most, and probably the regular working folks wouldn't get as much of a benefit from it. And Representative Mike Pence, who's now the vice president, at the time he was a representative, he also opposed it because it was such a big chunk of money that he thought that it was too much government involvement. In a way, it seemed way too much like communism, because the government would ultimately, with this bailout, own the majority shares in these major companies, and it seemed like a government takeover. So this whole battle over these companies that were too big to fail was really heated and really partisan. Ultimately, this whole chapter is really about the politics of who gets what, when, and how, and the TARP bill, that's the Temporary Asset Relief Program. This is the big bailout that they were proposing, was a big question. The story also shows us quite a bit about how the decisions of the government on economic issues really affects the stock market. In the text, it mentions that when the House took its first vote on the TARP bailout and the vote failed, that the stockbrokers who were working on Wall Street in the stock exchange were shocked that the government basically didn't bail out these big companies, and they started selling off stock. And it mentioned that the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is an index of major companies, fell 777 points, which was the biggest drop ever. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we saw an even bigger drop. So there are a lot of similarities between what happened in 2007 to 2009 and what's going on now. Completely different reasons, but you can see how the decisions that government makes affects the economy in dramatic ways. So I'm going to stop at this point with this introduction and pick up in a second with the second part of this video.